to hedge our bet.
Do most companies do the hedging? I mean, because you see the annual, you'll see quarterly earnings, and they'll say, well, if it hadn't been for getting dinged on the exchange rate, the numbers actually look much better than what we're reporting. But it would seem like if you're an international company like GE or Procter & Gamble,
Right.
wouldn't they have a team of people that make their living?
Yeah, depending upon the size of the investment overseas, and if they're going to bring it back.
We have enough market power. Here's the product, you pay in US dollars.
Right.
Or use contracts, right? Forward contracts or something?
No, it's just, we'll have an escalation, but everything's in US dollars.
I got you.
And then I want to talk a little bit about Birdie Golf. Because I talked with a couple people while you were doing this, and so I want to hear some of your. Rick, can I put you on the spot? So can you
Sure.
kind of talk me through yours and Lonnie's a little bit? So what was your approach?
To do what?
The Birdie Golf, so chapter 26. So the mergers and acquisitions case where
Well, are you?
Birdie's buying hybrids or hybrids buying Birdie.
Well, what was the thought process?
Yeah. So how'd that come together?
Well, this part of the thought process was, okay, let's make sure we understand who's the target, who's the acquirer. Let's make sure when we're either looking at cash deals or stock deals, what's the math that makes sure we get it in the right bucket so we don't get the math backwards. Make sure who's target, make sure who's acquiring. But the thought, I don't know that the problem, getting the stock, questions 3 and 4 were the easier pieces, I thought, just
Okay.
moving the stock around and saying, okay, what are the equivalent shares, et cetera. The dividend piece was kind of a wrinkle. Lonnie and I probably burned up way too much time saying, are we chasing the traditional operating cash flow model of EBIT plus depreciation minus taxes, or is the incremental cash, is that the dividend piece? And we, after a while, I just said, we got to pick. we got to make a decision. So we went down the dividend path of the incremental cash, which Lonnie had to sell me because I was like, no, we've been doing this operating cash flow model forever, and I think maybe this is a trick question or a red herring. So anyway, I'm not trying to just ramble on, but that was probably all the discussion before we said, okay, we got to roll up our sleeves, turn the calculators on, we got to make a decision. Are we turning left, turning right? So we picked dividends as the way to go.
How about everybody else? What else did you do? Did you think about that?
So I looked at the dividends in that $67.5 million. We chose to take that off of the initial cash rate. We treated it as a rebate, is what we did.
Right.
So that, yes, we would pay this much money for the corporation, but in reality, our cash outflow is this. And that's what we based it on.
So you reduced the year 1
So
by
the year 0.
year zero, and
That's
by
what we
that.
did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the majority of the time was spent in the data deck. Like once you had the data developed, it was, the questions weren't necessarily the challenging
Yeah, the
part.
math wasn't.
Well, that's what I'm saying, the questions themselves, like you were saying, 3 and 4, that wasn't, that was just a matter of going to make sure you had the right formula.
Yes.
It was making the decision on how we wanted to build the table.
Right.
That's where a lot of the difficulty, I thought, was in what, that's what we maybe did what you guys did, struggling with back and forth.
Yeah, and that was, I would say, that was the biggest conceptual thing that you really needed to think through in the problem. What am I buying?
Yeah.
Right. So if you're acquiring another company, in essence, what you're buying are their free cash flows.
Yes.
I mean, so what's it worth to me? How much should I pay to get this stream of free cash flows? And you're correct. I think, we, because we're on the operating side of the equation, think of, cash flow from assets or free cash flows as operating cash flow, right? EBIT plus depreciation minus taxes. And then out of that, what do I need to reinvest in net capital spending, my long-term items? What do I need to invest in my change in net working capital? And that got me to cash flow from assets, right? Which was also known as free cash flows. And not that they're free and that they don't cost you anything, it's that I've already taken the money out that I need to replenish the business. This is free because it's available to go out to the stakeholders. And that's really, to your, with your conversation, that's the part of the coin that I think everybody else forgets about. So the other side of the equation is, whatever these free cash flows are, have to be going to my stakeholders. So we have cash flow to creditors and cash flow to stockholders, right? And I can tell, I don't know how much debt they have, but I know that I'm paying interest. That's already included in the cash flows within the income statement. So they're getting their piece already as part of the income statement because I have to legally pay them. So then the question becomes, what am I giving to these guys? What are the stockholders getting? And that's where the dividend piece comes into play. Because when you get down to net income, right, 100% of the money has to get distributed. And so part of it goes to dividends. I give it to my shareholders, and part of it goes to the business to kind of replenish. And so the whole reason that bottom line, where it told you what the addition to retained earnings was going to be, was because they were giving you the breakout for the free cash flows. The dividends represented what is available for the stakeholders, right? So that would be cash that is above and beyond what the company is generating to keep the business going. It's available to be distributed out and kind of taken in by the shareholders. So that became the basis for your cash flows that you were buying. So when you look at the top, correctly, they're paying $250 million to buy this company, but right off of the bat, they've got $67.5 in dividends that would be coming to them to offset. So you're right, it's almost like a rebate or a bonus in year zero. So my true investment in today's dollars is that $182.5. Then I would look on the bottom of the financial table and say, all right, in that first year, addition to retained earnings is zero. I'm not putting any money back into the business, I'm giving it all out, so $20.7 million in the first year, and then from years 2 through 5, I'm getting a portion, right, of whatever the net income that they were generating. So if you discount those back, now the other reason I was asking kind of your thought process on here, Rick, is with these cash flows, because you're only talking about from the equity perspective, it's appropriate to discount them with that higher rate of 16.9, which is what you guys did, versus using a weighted average or including anything for debt. Because you're really buying the equity piece. So the equity cash flows, the dividends should be valued at the equity rate of return, which was the 16.9. Okay, so if you discount all those back and look at them, this project is generating a positive 20.8 million or so, 20.9 million. So we'd say, yeah, sure, we'll do it. We'll buy you. And that's kind of like the first problem, the first question in the problem really kind of set the table for the rest. So depending upon how you did with that piece, and
Probably tanked that for sure, because we didn't take the dividends from the company into that. We looked at EBIT and we backed out depreciation, we added depreciation and backed out taxes.
right.
Because we figured that dividends will be a future thing we can choose not to pay.
Okay. I get that, yes. So with that, so thinking with that, because you were on Randy's team, the only information you had to go in kind of the operating approach to the free cash flow was to be able to calculate operating cash flow.
Right.
If I had provided a balance sheet, then you would have been able to look at net capital spending and changing net working capital, but without the balance sheet, you couldn't get these two other pieces.
Right. So we kind of, since they weren't given, we assumed them to be zero.
Sure. And remember too, we're at the point of the book where you're not really we've gone from, mergers and acquisitions, we're looking externally now, acquiring other companies, you don't always have that inside information.
The question I have on this problem, so I can see on the sheet that we discount dividends.
Right.
Did anybody else catch that? Because I don't know anywhere in the question where we would have known to calculate that.
Well, they were giving you years 1 through 5.
Yeah, right. So,
What you're
So
really
that would
trying
represent
to
future free
This
cash
is what you're
flow,
trying to buy, this is what you're
future
buying,
dividends.
Randy. You're buying free cash flow from assets, which is the last line in the capital budgeting project
Yeah, right.
table, right? Has two sides, has an internal approach and an external approach. You didn't have enough information to use this side to get to this box,
okay,
but you had enough information to at least figure out what the shareholders would be
yeah,
getting.
didn't even look at it.
No, that's okay, that's why we're talking about it, that's why we're talking about it. But that's another way, again, free cash flow is the money available above and beyond what you need to keep running the business. And so what you're trying to figure out if you're acquiring another business is, sure, these guys are profitable and they're generating a net income, but I've got to put money back in to keep that train going. And so how much of it do I need? That's where the kind of the dumping of the bucket out every year, part of it is going back into the business, but the rest of it is available to be distributed out off the balance sheet.
So the extra 270 million, which I just assumed was money that was, I guess, extra cash flow that you would discount in year 5, would just be ignored?
Is it just
That was
irrelevant
cut
to
into
everything?
year 5 cash flow. In year 5.
That's the,
Value
When you're trying to calculate the NPV, is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
the 150,
Yeah, what is it?
The 270, which is.
That is in year 5, I believe.
It's
I
not
don't
on
see it
this.
on the.
I'm struggling.
We have it in
it
ours.
says,
Pull up.
It's not, is it on
I know,
Because I added it in.
Huh?
mine.
in 5 years, the value of hybrid golf is expected to be 270 million.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
Is that discounted?
So it would be-
150?
that's the 150, right?
Okay.
so how did you get to the 150? That's where I'm struggling.
It's discounted at the 12.4%.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it's right here, but it's.
Because that's the whole value of the firm, that's not just the equity dividends coming to you. So they discounted the 270 million by 12.4%.
That's why.
Okay, I think I got it.
That's why. I didn't discount that.
Yeah, I didn't even either.
All right.
Yeah, I just didn't discount
That's correct. So even though.
that. Yeah, so that was the only one.
So then if you're talking about the highest offer, so they made an offer of 250 million and these guys had 8 million shares
Yeah.
outstanding, so if you just divide the 250 by the 8 million, that's where they came up with the 3125. If you look at it and say, well, we don't want to take that, we're giving you all these free cash flows, we want more, well then the most you would possibly pay is your original offer plus the NPV of the project.
Yeah.
So that's how you get to the 270, and if you divide that by the 8 million shares, most you should pay is 3386.
So.
And again, your numbers might be a little off because your
No,
NPV
that
calculation.
was,
Okay. And then for the exchange ratio, for 3, you've got to figure out first essentially what they would be, what the current shareholders would be entitled to. So if you take their $87 times their 18 million shares, and you're going to be giving them the NPV, they're going to get the extra value once the companies are merged, and divide that up by the 18 million, they would be 8816. So their value is going to go up because you are buying this new company, you are bringing in the additional cash flows, that will flow to them as the new shareholders. Their price would go higher.
Based on that, okay. What other lines?
62.
So in terms of the exchange, 3125 compared to 8816, these guys would only get a fraction because they're not as big. And the most you would then offer is the 3386 over the 87 exchange rate of 3892. What's happened over there, John?
Just we're running through where we made our mistake.
Okay. I'll move this back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see what, I think I see.
What number did you get discounted?
What's that?
Which number?
What
did-
number?
uh,
I discounted
The
everything else
formulas
except for the
are there.
270. I did my refer to and didn't.
And click the wrong box.
Yeah. I just did discount. I discounted on the other one for the 10%.
That's why I don't use Excel, because that's the kind of stuff. I
I myself pressed it. Wait,
Smart.
This is the way to go, right here. You'll BA2, that's the way to go.
Is that your
You
friend?
did the right
Is that your
answer every
friend?
time.
That was your BA2 plus?
Actually, my goal is next year to learn Excel. I don't have time this year.
When's that retirement
I'll
coming?
get better next year.
Lynda.com.
Huh?
If you're a member of the Hamilton
Oh,
County
really?
Library, you have free access to
A
lynda.com.
tutorial kind of thing?
Teaches you everything.
Yeah, it's actually
What is
pretty
it?
good.
Yeah. LYNDA, you could learn
LYNDA.
Photoshop, you could
That's
learn
good to know,
QuickBooks,
because I got it. I gotta get that.
everything.
What's it stand
It's a woman.
Wow, that was,
for?
Linda?
that was swimming in this.
So in terms of, okay, maybe, you know, missed a box here or there, or missed something there.
One value.
Okay, that's fine. Conceptually, again, at the higher level, kind of get what you're doing here. When you're buying a company, take it all the way up, right up. My price I'm willing to pay is always based on what are you going to give me. It always comes down to cash flows. So when we take it all the way up to the corporate level, I'm buying their free cash flows. I'm buying whatever money is left over that doesn't have to go back into the business to support the business, because then that means it can go out to the stakeholders, right? You don't want to be taking the whole net income or the whole EBIT necessarily, because part of that money has to sustain the business. I can't pull it all out, because eventually then I don't have enough to keep it running.
Well, this was a good one for me, because Roto-Rooter's usually acquiring a franchise.
Right.
So our starting point is you have to pro-form 5 years of P&Ls based on what our P&L looks like, not what their P&L looks like. So you have to convert the privately held franchise to what it would look like publicly.
Right.
And then the guy who does our M&A work, he never said it to me this way, but the wiggle room was always what the cash flows were worth and putting some, and what the net present value was sitting there, and if it's a positive number, on this example, you had $20 million of wiggle room. I mean, if you think about it that way, you offer $250 million for the business, you had that extra $20 million sitting there with NPV, which if somebody would have said, Rick, we could go up to 270, would you go up to 270 for this business with everything you know, because we've crunched the numbers and we got this.
You're over zero, right?
Yeah,
So
so we
at NPV
So any
of zero,
positive
he's
NPV
getting his rate of return.
So we've already established the rate of return, so whatever that NPV is, that's, you
And
could almost go dollar for dollar, not to exceed, right? And that made sense to me, because I think, I knew it intuitively, but I didn't really get it till we had to crunch numbers to figure
And
it out.
that's exactly what that question number 2 is asking you to do. It's basically saying, all right, you know it's 250, you're making money on this project, tack on the NPV and then divide it by the number of shareholders, that's the maximum to get you to zero.
Right.
Right? You're basically saying, I'm willing to pay for whatever the company is doing and that NPV that it's generating in return. So what changes your offer then is the rate of return and the risk involved, right,
Yes.
of the cash flows that you're thinking about.
Yes.
And how well you think that company is operating. When these are their pro formas and what they think they would need to turn it back in, this is where you really have to go in and sort of peek under the hood and say, are they really putting enough aside for net capital spending, or is some of the machinery run down, we're gonna have to replace it?
Well, it's tricky because they won't tell you what you don't ask.
Right,
So you try to ask every question you can possibly ask, but they're gonna say, if you'd have asked, I'd have told you, you didn't ask,
right,
so I didn't have to disclose. I know everything, you know nothing, go fish.
right.
So part of not overpaying is how
How well
good
they
is the
hide.
due diligence? How well can you figure out what's being hidden where,
Yeah.
so when you pro forma it, it's pretty clean, there's not any big gaffes in there that you go, my God, we should have known this, or we should have caught that. Those mistakes all get uncovered year one after the acquisition, but the company being acquired doesn't feel any obligation to have to share
Right.
any of that info. They're obligated to tell you if you ask, but
Right.
they won't disclose what you don't ask.
And if you've ever bought a home, all right, the seller,
Same thing.
you know, has to disclose if there's been something major like a water leak or damage. The law requires them to do that, but beyond that, they don't have to tell you. That's why we have inspections, and you know that, oh my gosh, this furnace is 15 years old, it's probably gonna break or need to be replaced within the next couple of years. That's easily $5,000. You know, the roof is sagging a little bit, if I have to replace that, that's gonna be another $10,000. So you intuitively know that I shouldn't be paying list price for this house because I'm gonna have to fix some of those things that are, you know, more the upper infrastructure, right, my bigger ticket items. For a company, I'm looking at the equipment, the machinery, what's the livelihood of that stuff going forward, how quickly are we gonna have to replace it? You wanna kind of cut into and beat into as much of those numbers as you can, because they aren't going to volunteer it. You've got, they have to answer if you ask the question, but if you don't ask the questions, it's not gonna be there. For the networking capital stuff, my guy Dino, unfortunately, who couldn't come in, who does this kind of for private equity firms, trying to find the valuations, he's always looking at inventory, because inventory looks like a nice big fat number, and generally speaking, it is probably not turning, discontinued, work, you know, wear and tear. They haven't marked it down, but they probably should. So what are you really getting if you buy it? What's saleable?
Is there like a standard set basic kind of check sheet that that would be out there, or is it, obviously it's gonna be company to company because everything is
Yeah, I mean,
different,
it's,
but like,
no, the answer is no. I mean,
Okay.
it's industry specific,
Surprise.
because what am I buying? What do I have to worry about?
like if you're a Roto-Rooter, if you're going out.
But it's even
you guys-
it's even market specific. What'll happen, Mike, is they're all well connected.
Yeah,
So if we buy Colorado Springs, right? And I'm just making it up, it's a small market, we pay $1 million to buy a very small franchise.
yeah,
Every other franchise in the system knows 5 minutes after we close that we paid $1 million for Colorado Springs. Anybody who's got a comparable size, or they're going, well, that was 500,000 people, I'm 1 million people, I want $2 million. I'm gonna call home office and see if they'll give me $2 million for my business, because I have twice as many people. I mean, that's how they think. And then we have to back them off and go, no, you can't compare Colorado Springs to Jacksonville, Florida. They're not the same. We're in the same business, Roto-Rooter, but you can't say everything's equal. You can't say, you know, what's your revenue, what's your market share, what's this, what's your business mix, what about this? I mean, the list is endless, but you kind of have to go through that discussion, because once the word gets out what you're paying, they want to just do simple math. Well, give me a multiple of that, because I'm 3 times bigger than that market, so I want 3 times what you just paid that person. So it gets tricky when
Right.
it's kind of an incestual, everybody knows everybody, and everybody talks to everybody, and it makes deal-making very hard, because they don't have all the data, they don't know what we're looking at, and it's tricky. So I don't mean to get too windy here, but that's the,
And it depends on what side of the transaction you're on,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm buying, I'm trying to say, this isn't worth as much, I'm trying to knock it down. If I'm selling, I'm trying to prop it up. And it
Yeah.
does also get into the people piece, even though we don't normally think, again, people are not part of the balance sheet and the assets. But if you're gonna retain key employees,
yeah.
have you been doing any of your training, right? How far behind are these folks, and how much money and capital are we gonna have to spend to get everybody, you know, kind of up to standards, up to snuff to operate the rest of, the
Right.
way the rest of the corporation works? That's gonna eat into
Yeah,
and
it's
TV as
interesting.
well.
It's interesting you say that, because that's part of what AK Steel highlighted when they acquired the, was it Deerfield or something like that?
Yeah.
They talked about the training that they had to invest around, because they were so, they had so many accidents.
Yep.
And it's such an OSHA heavy, safety's a big part of the business.
Right.
And you saw they had to spend a lot of time and money to get them up to snuff to where they were.
But see,
That's why they had
we've got
to-
an easy acquisition model, we're buying the same thing over and over and over
Right, yeah.
again. So.
But how
so-
well do they execute the
So
model?
we just have to analyze, I get pulled in on how well are they operating the business, because we know what the business is, and we're buying the same thing over and over again. GE's not buying the same thing over and over and over again.
Hospitals are not buying this.
Procter & Gamble's not buying the same thing over and over and over again, so when P&G buys Gillette, that kind of has nothing to do with the previous acquisitions, because they got to figure out what Gillette's worth. We don't have to go through that thought process, we just have to look at the last 50 franchises we've acquired, because the model is so similar that we don't have that many moving pieces. I don't know how P&G could value a Gillette and know everything, right? That'd be hard to do, I would think. Hindsight says they might not have gotten that one quite right.
The market is saying that.
They might have
That's
paid a little
whole
too much.
other discussion.
But it's interesting stuff, and I'm not,
Yeah.
and I'm not suspecting, I'm not saying I'm any good at this. I get pulled in on, do you think you can make this much profit from it, Rick, if we pay this much? I don't get pulled in on, do you think we valued it properly? I get pulled in more, can you leverage what you believe are the opportunities running the business? I don't get asked to put a dollar tag on it.
Like, I wouldn't say there's a standard checklist, because again, there are people that they do not, this is their career, right? Is evaluating M&As and coming up with the numbers, and you work with investment banks, so people that do this on a regular basis so that they know what questions to ask, kind of where the catches in the contracts are. I would say the same when you are getting ready to lease a location, right? If you haven't really done this before, you don't even know what clauses to be wary of, what do I not want to sign on, so you find people that do this for a living to ask those things. But if you're buying, you're looking at the people, right? You're looking at the building, the assets that they have, what am I going to have to replace, how much training am I going to have to do, where's the leakage going to occur? Because they're going to give you the rosiest picture of how they've been doing, which is why you want to buy them in the first place, right? They've shown some signs of success, but where are some of those areas maybe being glossed over or kind of shielded behind a curtain that maybe it's not quite as good if we start peeking underneath the covers to see what's really going on here. Employee turnover is another number to kind of ask, because if there's a revolving door with hiring, that's another hidden cost of trying to get new people on board, get them onboarded, they finally become productive, why are they continuing to leave, right? That tells me there's something going on in the operations that isn't quite right if we keep having a higher employee turnover. So those would be clues of where to start looking for things, but there isn't an exhaustive list for this. Okay. Sound good? Any tidbits from healthcare that you've seen in terms of physicians groups being acquired or anything like that that you might?
Oh, I think, well, all I can say, I wasn't privy to any of the numbers, but actually, my other two healthcare colleagues in this group can attest to this as well. There was a trend in the industry to acquire private practices and bring in as many as you could and to acquire them at all costs. So the specifics of the deal, I don't think were scrutinized as closely or paid attention to, because the objective was really just to get as many bodies into your network as you could, because doctors meant patients.
Right.
Doctors were access to patients.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is that deals are being renegotiated and doctors are making less money in the second wave of deals, because there's been more time to, A, to scrutinize the deal, but B, also to see the performance of the physicians and the practices. And so in any event, I haven't been in healthcare long enough to know this, but they say the pendulum's swinging in a direction it swung before. And at some point, it may make sense for physicians to become independent again, and they'll just go out and start their own businesses again.
Yeah. One of my former students is actually the director of physician compensation at Mercy. And
Oh, really?
That's all they do is scrutinize.
Who's that?
I was going to say Kelly Ruth, that was her maiden name, Kelly Mayon. She was in Cincinnati, now she's working out of Cleveland.
She's all in that one here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know she is, yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Been for a long time. So I was gonna say, so you wanna, so that's been my personal, knowing people who are kind of in the inside circle.
There are
of
a
that.
lot of doctors who, well, so then the other thing that happened is that, once they acquired the practices, the doctors wanted to run their own businesses, they weren't their own businesses anymore.
Right.
And so the issue was productivity, so it used to be that if you're a physician, you could say, hey, it's Friday, I'm gonna go play golf, not that all physicians do that, but, hey, it's Friday. I'm gonna-"
That's Wednesday.
That's what I'm gonna take a long weekend, or, don't schedule me this day.
Right.
I'm not available this day, and what they're finding now is, no,
You can't.
you're a 40-hour-a-week employee at a minimum, and if you're working for us, it's
Or
because you're
watching
seeing
them.
patients, and,
Mhm.
Right.
yeah.
And we need 3 months of, notice before taking you to. But anyway, yeah, that is very true.
Okay. Same.
It's the same,
Okay.
like when I started there after, I think they were 5 years old, almost 5 years old. And it was within 6 months after I started that they no longer had their mergers and acquisitions like meeting, that they had it at least once a month because it was growing so rapidly, and it went from I think it was a merge, and then they wound up with 110 locations in a matter of less than 5 years.
It's a lot to swallow pretty quickly.
But then now we're cleaning up the mess of what Alex was talking about, of running independently. It's getting better, it's gotten better in the last few years.
I'm very curious to see what healthcare is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years, because the model, the pendulum is swinging, and doctors are not making as much, and
The thing that's supporting.
insurance costs are going up for us as consumers, and who's happy in this model? Like,
Right.
nobody's winning. Doctors aren't winning, the patients aren't winning,
Yeah.
who's kind of making
But
money?
what I'm hearing is that
The
the
consolidators are winning.
Yeah.
millennial
Yeah.
physicians are really
Hospitals.
differently motivated from their predecessors,
Right.
who were more business people and were more focused on making money in the business, and this isn't paint with a broad brush, but
Right.
I think that the mentality of this hegemon that is the millennial physician is supporting this new structure. So they want to come in and say, okay, yeah, I'll do this, and I don't have to make as much money, but if I can structure things my way, then that's fine, I don't mind working this. And that's what a lot of people, I don't know if that's the case that you had, but a lot of people I know are working in recruiting saying it's easier now because we're not working with former business owners who are now employees, we're working with people who are being born into an employee environment.
No, I think you're right. I mean, friends I have that are closer to my age, they can't wait to get out of practicing.
Yeah.
I mean, they just, if you look at it over maybe a 20-year time span, it was the good old days 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And things have changed dramatically. And it's not just their compensation. There's more irritants than just not making the money. There's a lot of other issues.
Charting.
Yeah.
One of my friends, he was like, I forget, he's usually, when he's in the office, because he teaches, he's supposed to be till 5 and he always runs late, and their electricity went out. He got out at like 4:30 that day. He's like, we just like pushed everyone right through, and it was all paper, it was so easy.
Oh. That's it.
Done a few systems, done a
But
few
just to
systems.
add a little bit
Yeah.
of color to this is that, when we as physicians talk about the future of medicine, and we do see the millennial doctors coming up and their work ethic is completely different than